Good evening, Ted. You all good? Yeah. So, raise your hand if you've been inspired tonight. That's good. Raise your hand if you've learned something new tonight. Who of you've got questions? Good. So, tonight is about reimagining the higher education. Now, the founder of our innovation and creativity firm, George Prince, he talked about, oh, this is quite dark, that another word for creativity is courage. So to do something new, he discovered, takes an immense amount of courage. It takes an immense amount of courage to put your hand up and speak. It takes an immense amount of courage to start challenging the way things are done. You have an opportunity now to do that, to start doing that, to be the new inspiration. We have fantastic speakers here, and I'd love to give them another round of applause, please. If you guys like to come up into your chairs, this is your opportunity. There are going to be two parts to this. This is your opportunity to raise your hand and to start asking those questions that are inside of you, and I encourage you and invite you to be courageous. You have a great space here, a very collaborative space, and a space that you can trust to start speaking out the ideas and to start sharing the inspiration that you've received this evening. And we have some prizes for those first courageous people that will raise their hands. Oh, look at the hands already go up. I like that. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The second part is that I would also like, once some of our speakers are going to have to go and catch airplanes because they're very busy people. So those that exit the stage, they're off to catch those airplanes. That's some particular.
He doesn't have a credential.
Yeah. Well, he wanted to do things differently, right? He wanted to do things differently, yeah. Which is good. I hope not to trip over you. And the second part is, I love persistence here. We'll get there. So, and the second part is that we'd also like to hear from you about things that you've been inspired by. So the one part of this is to ask questions while we have our speakers with us, and we'll probably do that for about 20, 30 minutes or so, and for the remaining part is to close the evening off. And there are some questions up here that we framed up at the beginning of the evening, and that if you look at these, this could start getting your thinking going to start sharing to the rest of the audience. You ready? All right. Hands. Who has a question? All right. We have 1, 2. We need a mic. Thank you. And this is for you.
I don't know if this would actually get an answer, but Stanford just started, or I think they just started, free online courses available to anyone in a few disciplines. So I was wondering if any of you know where that initiative came from and whether other Ivy League, or I guess Stanford's not Ivy League, whatever, big big universities are doing the same, and what, like, do you see that growing a lot, and in what direction?
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, Stanford famously started a course just now on artificial intelligence. So this is not exactly Econ 101. Sorry? They have a number of others. But the one that's getting the most press is artificial intelligence. And the reason for that is that this one course taught by 2 professors, if you look at the, if it were to actually be given a actual credit, if it was to be done on a per credit basis, would issue more class credits than the rest of the university combined. Okay, 1 class. Now, it is an experiment. It is not done, as far as I understand yet, on a robust platform that is meant for high-level courses. But it is something which I think many of these universities believe in, very much so. That it takes what MIT has done with OpenCourseWare. By the way, any of you here and people from around the world, you can all go home right now and learn whatever an MIT student learns formally. All of their courses are online. You can go do it. You can sign up to the Stanford class, and in this case, actually take take the homework and do tests and get graded for it. The problem that the industry has, and I think that various people are trying to solve in different ways, is that learning is becoming more and more free, certainly knowledge acquisition. Accreditation is becoming more and more expensive, right? And so universities have learned that this is great promotion for Stanford, for MIT, great PR, while they still protect the accreditation, the fact that, yes, well, we know you aced that class, but we're not really going to give you a course credit for it because it breaks down the model of what you go to these universities for, which makes sense. It's not because they're malicious, it's not because they have malintent. They would love to educate 10 times as many students. It's simply that the model that they operate in doesn't support it.
Thank you. Yeah. By the way, these are gift cards for TED books, where you can go online and you can get inspiring reading. Courtesy of TED.
So we started this evening with Dale Stevens talking about not just changing the current system, but working outside the current system. And then most of the other speakers agree that the current system isn't working the way we want it to, and they have different approaches to what they're going to do with that. I'd like to circle back to Dale Stevens and see what his response is to the other 6 speakers.
Many of the people in this room, I think, as Michael noted during our talk, have solutions that could potentially be the big disruptor in education. The problem is that no one quite has traction yet. They're great ideas, they're funded, they're building, but we haven't actually seen what will work out in the real world. And until we get actual students going through these actual programs, we have no idea. In my ideal world, I think students would be able to leverage pieces of University Now, of Minerva, of Fidelis, and take them and form them into a cohesive learning program. I haven't yet seen a company that would facilitate that process, but in a way, that's what the internet facilitates itself. You have the power to display what you've learned on any basis to anyone without having to take the authority of any specific individual.
Could I get a show of hands here from the audience? If you were going to do your education again, or you had an opportunity to, or you wanted to be inspired to do another education, who of you, if you had raise of hands, would try something new of the things that you've heard tonight? About half of you. All right. Let's get more motivated. Hands, yes. Over here, please. And here's a present.
I really just asked it.
Yeah, I know. There are only a few.
A couple of things. My background is, like one of the speakers, sort of have been a education saboteur my whole life in one form or another. But I have 2 master's degrees, one in information science and then in architecture, and then spent 9.5 years homeschooling my children. They are now at name universities, for what it's worth, but even before graduating have started their own business. As an older person myself, my key concern is a lot of the world's population is aging, and a lot of what we need to know is about plasticity of the brain. So a lot of this discussion has been about learning, 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 which is essentially a passive activity. A little bit of discussion about, wait, hang on, I know. And a lot of the emphasis also is on creating leaders. It's more really about learning to think forever and learning to generate. So I think a lot of the Western mentality is take it all in and become a leader and put it out there and all that. I think a lot of it is really more internal processing and generating.
I beg to differ. There's actually a whole line of research around expertise that talks about what is it that it takes to become an expert, and a lot of it shows that it's not general. You can't be a critical thinker and then, hey, I think I'll write a history paper. You can learn to think critically in history, right? So it's very domain specific. Another line of work shows that for most people, and again, there's always the exceptions, but let's talk about the bulk. For most people, instruction, problem solving, becoming more skilled actually benefits deeply by embedding concepts immediately in task application, right? And so the point is not to just focus on rote doing tasks and ignoring concepts. And the point is not to just do conceptual stuff in theory for years and then, ooh, why don't we go apply stuff? What you actually want is a very tight cycle between task in the domain, and as you hit a complexity in the task, for the very first time as a student, whoa, here are the concepts that apply, and here's the instruction for those concepts, and now let's put it to work. That kind of instructional cycle can reduce the amount of time to mastery by 25%, and when applied in a wide range of areas, creates graduates who can actually work on their first day of the job, which is actually no longer the norm. Whether you're a medical person, an attorney, or all kinds of things, you can't work on the first day of the job, right? You'll notice almost everything I'm talking about here is related to success at work, all of that. It's not the general leadership characteristics, which are also important, but those are different. If you want success at work, you actually have to have practice at that somewhere along the way. The last thing is, boy, learning is not passive at all. In fact, that's the problem. You know, we did the worst thing in the world to all of you. We lectured at you. I mean, you're going to walk out of here in about a day or two, you're going to wonder, God, they were kind of cute, and that guy kicking his feet in the air was kind of fun, but I don't remember what he talked about, right? Because we didn't do you the courtesy of putting you through a proper learning environment. We should have had you working. We should have had you asking each other questions. We should have had you giving us illustrations of what we talked about in your lives. Then you'd walk out actually having mastered something, right? So we didn't do you the courtesy of actually giving you a good learning environment. Apologies to all of us.
Yeah, and look, and I'll just add, because to teach leadership is not to say, oh, look, here's a good leader, be like him, right? It's to actually create brain plasticity to understand how to analyze. So I have done a minor amount of research, which is major by most accounts, on leaders and what made them. And if you look at creators, and I conflate the two, basically, I look at people who've created and who've moved the world forward as the people who've led the world, as opposed to people who've led countries and things like that. But if you look across the arts, music, science, politics, theory, etc., the characteristics that are applied to different areas are actually quite similar. They understand how to triangulate and ask questions and look at problems from different perspectives. They have that desire and thirst for knowledge. They have deep domain expertise. They have broad understanding of areas around their domain. And most importantly, they integrate all of those things and make important leaps that effectively cause the disruptions that move the world forward. So that is not something that people just come upon rarely. You know, with the passing of Steve Jobs, we look at him as a unique man in history. And unfortunately, that's true. But there's no reason why you cannot train people to be not just like Steve Jobs, but to have that same incredible synthesis of all of those elements. And I do think you can do that.
I think the most important thing is getting out of their head to learn when to stay out of their pockets and when to facilitate and catch the wave when it's there. That's right. And if you can cultivate that.
What's interesting briefly is I think when we said learning up here, and a lot of people naturally think teaching, which is a passive activity as it's been done. And I think a lot of us just sort of assume, experts do this all the time, they talk in a language that just excludes sort of a lot of other people. And I think, you know, there's a lot of agreement with what you're saying on that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we had a question up front here, and then we'll move to the back. Thank you.
Thanks. I also homeschool my kids, which means that either homeschoolers are really big mouths or or we're here because we believe in alternate forms of education outside of institutions and are passionate about sharing what we know, which is the fact that it works, and looking to where else it can be found and extrapolated on. So my comment / question, I guess it's more of a throwing out an idea, is it seems like one of the big tensions in the issue we're dealing with has to do with education at its best is active, is interactive, is personalized. And we're talking about the big question, which is a really important one, which is how do we scale and improve education on a larger level? And I think there's a fundamental tension between those two things, that we know that you're going to do a better job of educating us if we can all interact and all speak and be constructive in our learning. But in some cases like this one, it's just not realistic. And the same holds true for the larger education system. And so I just kind of want to throw that out as an idea too. How do you deal with the fact that education at its best is highly personalized, highly individualized, but not necessarily scalable in those terms?
I don't have an answer for this, but I want to make one quick observation about the English language. In the English language, efficient and effective are two different words. And in French, for example, they are the same word. It's efficace. If something is efficient, it has to be effective, and if something is effective, it has to be efficient. I would argue that school as it stands is very efficient. It educates lots and lots and lots of people, but it doesn't do it very effectively.
Look, I think that the good news is that I think the technology allows us to do it, right? So I had a sort of an awakening moment in my last company where I walked into a room. In fact, we ran a study. We hired the guys out of Microsoft that built Encarta. We were running a tutoring program, and we were tutoring 30,000 kids around the US. All these kids were in failing schools. All of them were kids who were years behind. And we ran these studies, and we ran these tutoring programs at 5-to-1, right? So really interactive, hands-on, 4 or 5 kids in a room with a teacher, nobody can hide. And we were getting results. We got a bunch of schools off the failing list, off of the, these schools weren't making AYP is what they call it, on the No Child. We were moving the needle. And we told these guys from Microsoft, we said, look, you guys are, and these were the guys that built and commercialized Carnegie Learning, the software that was bought. So they actually came in to commercialize it, didn't go anywhere. And someone said, hey, there's this guy with a company, you should come see what he's doing. So I said, look, how about this? We're gonna do this like real entrepreneurial. I'm not gonna tell you what to do, but you look at what we're doing and you guys build some stuff that competes. I wanna see if the software can deliver the same result, that were interactive, engaging results. We ran 12-week pilots, Newark, New York City, Seattle, Oakland, right? Tough neighborhoods, 12-week pilots. By the second set of pilots, the software was beating the tutors 2-to-1. It was a rout. The third set of pilots, I took the whole team, jumped on an airplane and said, I gotta understand this. We walked into a room, you got 20 kids in the room. 2 of them are competing, in pairs of 2 kids doing addition, subtraction, competing with 2 kids doing multiplication tables. There's a horse on the screen, they're doing problems. They're chatting back and forth, and they're doing math problems. 2 more kids are reading to a piece of software, and the software is comparing their voice to an acoustic model. And every word they get wrong, what the software says is, hey, you got this word wrong, we'll give you another story with that word in it. I mean, super engaging stuff. And I'd been in enough classrooms. I had a charter school chain before this. So I've seen this stuff from, one side to the other side. And I walked in and I said, whoa, and my partner looked at me and said, what's wrong? You stepped out of the room, you seem upset. And I said, no, I just saw the future. I get it. It's like someone, the first time you saw the iPhone, someone reached into the future, grabbed a phone and said, here's what it looks like. And you say, oh, yeah, it's the phone. I looked at that and I said to my partner, and we were a 2-year-old company with 30,000 students doing 60 million in revenue. I turned to my partner and I said, we're in the wrong business. That's what the business we need to be in. And I've been looking for that model. So what I would say to you is that we don't need any more studies. What you're talking about is actually possible. I saw it with my own eyes. This is why I'm sitting here tonight, building university now and not like doing university last year, right?
I wanted to add to that there are ways now of using technology to actually enhance and combine people together in different ways than has happened before. We run at Kaplan in our test prep side something called Live Online, where we have tutors who are now on an Adobe Connect session where they are live. They have students that are working with them. They even have TAs working on the side. They can actually all work together. The TAs can watch the conversations and provide kind of customized, individualized tutoring while the tutor is running a class. And that's only the beginning of what one can do. We have adaptive homework engines that we're plugging into our classroom SAT tests so that the adaptive homework allows the students to get converged before they arrive in class, and then the software actually suggests to a tutor which subgroups students should be in for the group activities when they get together. So there's ways for technologies to really not just be, the thing I hate is when people say, oh, let's just buy iPads, because I'm sure that'll work. right? Whole states have done stuff like this. I mean, it's like, what were you thinking? I mean, what is it supposed to do? You know, buy a book. You'll have the same problem. I mean, what is it for? And the trick is to have this, a model of what you need to do for learning, the personalized pieces, and then it's exactly using technology to make that personalization scalable, reliable, ubiquitous, affordable, and ultimately data-rich. Because if we can get more data off of every interaction that we see, those live online sessions I mentioned, they're all recorded. We can actually identify which tutors have an extraordinary impact on the certain problems that everyone in the network is having difficulty with. We can go look at them and say, what did you do? Because all your students seem to rock in this thing. And then we can try to train the other tutors, right? Man, that's fabulous to actually have that rich data compared to the normal evanescent classroom experience where you might have been successful, but you can't even remember what you did. And nobody else was there to watch either. So that's that whole tapestry of data, I think, that can help with mass customization. But to be clear, these will never, I think, exceed the most elite and talented teachers. And it just can't. I mean, it's like, where is artificial intelligence? It's like, I don't know. I used to do research on this, and that was 20 years ago. You're not going to replace that 1% of the best teachers and the best teaching experiences. Those will be magical forever. But we can't rely on that, as others have said. We need the whole ocean to get higher. And that's why we need other methods that can reach deeper into the personalization, maybe not ever reach what the really elite expert teachers can do. But there's a lot we can do.
Great. Thank you. This is for you. Yeah, question at the back. With the blue shirt.
Hi, Goguen Beyond, co-founder of Udemy. One of the things that I think is really interesting, particularly when I come to events like this, is that there aren't a whole lot of engineers, usually speaking. And that's not a problem. I think there are plenty, most excellent entrepreneurs. I mean, there's plenty, you know, it is what it is. There's lots of entrepreneurs. I'm not an engineer myself. But what I think is interesting is that I wonder what you guys think about product development and design and engineering as it relates to education, as opposed to business model innovation and you know, operations innovation.
Well, I am an engineer. I'm an electrical engineering engineer.
Awesome.
I'm a educate. I actually view my job as a learning engineer, and in fact, to me, it's a role that's missing. If you think about engineers, I'm also an MD, right? So if you think about physicians are essentially the engineers of biological sciences, right? They share the same truths, they share the same research base, but one group is trying to apply it to problems and get graceful, scalable solutions out of the science. And the other group is following their nose into the sky, and they work very well together across boundaries. Materials engineers, materials scientists, physics, and so forth, there's all this relationship. There are no learning engineers, really. You know, there's this huge cognitive science wall. Well, where are the engineers who apply those? They should be working in our schools. They should be working in our curriculum shops, right? So that's actually what I'm doing, is I'm actually, within Kaplan, I'm creating learning engineers. That's what I do. So that's actually an answer to your question of what do I think should happen. That's what I think should happen. I'm trying to make it happen. So
super quickly, to me, design is absolutely critical to learning. Beautiful design, thoughtful design, really focusing on how people learn and how they interact with whatever the medium is that they're interacting with. Teaching, learning is about connecting. Right? Great design allows people to connect with each other, allows people to connect with content, and so I don't think you can overinvest in design and in the actual student's experience in going through content, nor with the student's experience in connecting with one another. I think that knowledge only exists when it's shared between people, and to kind of address the previous question as well, a way to create that human personalization in addition to the computer adaptive stuff that's out there is to turn students into teachers. It's when you know somebody's really learned something is when they can teach it.
Great, so there were a couple questions that came up about why there were no women on the panel. So so I know there was just a couple of hands. There was one over here that would like to ask a question around that. Yeah. It was you. Oh, it was here. All right. Okay. They're fighting about it. Thank you. Would you like to stand up? Thank you so much. Mute, maybe?
Check. Got an extra battery up there?
I think we can
Hello?
hear you if just, yeah.
Yeah, we'll hear you. We'll repeat the question.
We're not responsible for scheduling.
No. So but it's a good question. Let's not throw it on the organizers. That I think, just as an aside, if you had to pick, by the way, who I think would be the most interesting entrepreneurs in education that will be on the cover of Time and so forth in the years ahead, assuming it's not disrupted and is gone, I actually think you have the collection sitting in front of us right here. It's hard to believe, I think, what an amazing group of talent they've assembled. So I'd start with that. But the second thing I'd say is actually the problem that you're hitting on is a really interesting one, especially as you look at the developing world, where disruption is going to have huge impact on how it transforms education. In the same way that developing world did not create landlines to have phone communication, they just jumped over that, right? And started to go to mobile communications and mobile payments and so forth. And look where we are as the US on that front, woefully behind. There's no reason to think that they would replicate the factory model education system that we have in place when you can leapfrog us as well, having this huge pipeline. And there's a second part of it, which is, hoping I get my numbers right, but 200 million students around the world literally do not have access to a primary education, do not have a school. 70 million do not have access to a secondary education. Forget about high school. A lot of those are women because you have to travel far distances, which just aren't safe in these developing world countries. And the power to create communities locally through online learning in these places and mobile learning and so forth, I think is going to defy our expectations of what this innovation looks like for that population in some really exciting ways going forward. That's going to actually radically shift hopefully the answer to that question in the years to come.
And I think there's a really short answer to the question from what I've been told, which is that it was scheduling. There were 3 or 4 women who were invited and they couldn't make it, and so it was scheduling, I believe, was what I was told for tonight. Defending the organizers, they really did. They did an amazing job.
These guys, I'm telling you, these guys are going to change the world up here. So,
Thank you. There was a question over here.
Wait, hold on, Kyle.
Oh, you go. All right. Good. Thanks.
Hello. So it works now. I work in architecture and urban space design, and I'm actually really interested in what you're doing because, and there's 2 points that I wanted to make. First, if we do experience this radical shift in what's happening with education and 50% of people leave universities, I wanted to kind of ask about the design side. What happens to these university spaces? You know, what are these spaces becoming? And then the second half of that is, you know, kind of in parallel to the economics of cities, and this may be for Mr. Horn. What does a business model of decline look like for a university, for the physical infrastructure of a university? And you can imagine with the woman who was speaking earlier that maybe these beautiful cities, these micro cities that we have, become places for the aging or elderly. Maybe they're not universities at all anymore. But I was wondering what you thought.
I absolutely love those questions, and I don't have a good answer, but I would love to talk with you and anyone else who's interested in that subject, because I think that the answers to those questions are so critical to flipping again the problem on its head and not asking, like, what's the role of online education and on-ground education, right? What's the role of online learning and ground-based education, but instead saying, in a world where you've got ubiquitous, excellent, world-class online education for everyone, what's the role of physical space? No one has cracked it. No one's really gone after it. It's one of the most important questions out there because design is that important.
I bet in 10 years, offline education is going to be hipster. Everyone's talking about online education and devaluing the role of in-person interaction. And it wouldn't surprise me if it makes a resurgence. What if people who are outside of college start creating hackerspaces, or start occupying those universities and turning them into resource centers of their own accord?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question too. Let me just say one word about online learning, actually, or a thing about that, just to elaborate on it, because I think what you'd see is that when you say the word online, the phrase online learning, everyone thinks, oh my God, everyone's doing something in front of a computer, and oh boy. The reality of it is that I think all of us think of it more as a platform that helps to individualize the experiences that you would get at any one point. So certainly some activities would be online, but plenty of activities would be offline in your local community, in a place of meaningful work, whatever it might be. And the point is that the platform is able to individualize for those different experiences, and that's what online learning will look like. I'm much more familiar with the space, candidly, in the K-12 area. And if you looked at a company like a K-12 Inc. that is perhaps the leading online learning company in that sector, you'd actually see the kindergartners that work basically as homeschoolers with the online curriculum, only spending about 10-20% online. And I think Bror Saxberg, who designed that experience, actually left to catch his flight, so he would know better. But the reality is at that age, you actually want a lot of offline experiences, and I think it's appropriate to the task and so forth. In K-12, it's easy for me to imagine that while I think there's going to be massive disruption, those physical spaces are going to turn into the community centers that actually anchor local places and so forth to bring together people that want to do arts in person, the soccer teams, a lot of those sorts of experiences that are actually just as important, but can be facilitated in very different ways. And I haven't thought as much about what the university might look like as well, but I suspect you'd get similar answers where you'd repurpose those spaces to be deeply meaningful for those communities. And something Gunnar talks a lot about is the industrial clusters. Fill the needs for those actual clusters to make it productive for the citizens and the community itself would be my guess.
So I would leave you with a concept, one that I've actually given more thought to than I should have. But imagine in 15 years, campuses become like theme parks. They basically become affinity experiences, right? And so I really want to get an MIT education, but I can't live more than 5 miles away from the Metropolitan Opera, right? So I have to live in New York, but I'm going to get my education at MIT, right? Similarly, I am a diehard University of Michigan football fan, and Michigan is going to be in my blood. I've got to be at the stadium every single Saturday, but I'm getting my education from Rice. Right, and I think what will happen to university campuses is that the campus experience and the location will have its own set of things that are unique to that experience, and the educational layer will effectively be largely divorced from it. That's my dystopian, utopian view.
Great, yes. Oh, sorry, we're going to go there first, yeah. It was to the edge. You guys are going to have to start fighting for the microphone. Yeah, it is. Thanks. Thank you.
Hi. So when I was going through school, one of the most important things that I saw, that I had to learn basically, was how to ask questions in an effective way. I mean, I would see other students and they wouldn't understand something, but they just didn't know how to articulate what they didn't know. And so I was just sort of wondering, sort of, how does the stuff you're talking about sort of play into that? And sort of how do you teach that, basically?
Yeah, so I was a counterintelligence and human intelligence officer, and they have great training on asking good questions.
Why?
I can imagine borrowing heavily from that.
How do you do that online?
No waterboarding or anything?
Well, I was joking, as you may have gathered. But the way you would do it online, if you were to do it online, would be to begin with having someone try. So there'd be a process, have people try and have them fail and therefore get curious, right? Then they would come in and based on their failures at doing it the right way and doing it in a good way, they would then take their curiosity and apply it to the theory that's behind how you go about questioning, how you go about formulating good questions that actually get the answers you're looking for. You would then, based on that theory, give them some practical application. There'd be some modeling. You'd get to watch some videos of different experts doing it their way, describing what they like, what they don't like, and then you would have some formative experience in a physical space that hopefully the young woman back in the back would help design, that would then cement the lesson in a permanent way. Then they would turn into a teacher.
I'd offer just one other quick piece off that, which is appropriate to the cognitive task at hand. You would have the right set of experiences there, right? So no one here is saying that it's going to be a monolithic education system. We're trying to blow that up. And so what you would instead have is at a certain point in your progression, when you need that environment where you're having Socratic questioning, those conversations that happen that are, I think everyone would agree, invaluable, you want to actually enrich and dive deeper at that moment when it's right for you and you reach that stage where you're ready to do that. And that's something that the educational experience right now sort of ignores, that opportunity to enhance and dive deep on those question asking, and then that being the teacher as well. It's something that sort of gets neglected right now, and I think that's part of the utopian view that we ought to be pushing for, and it sometimes gets neglected. Again, I think when we sort of just imagine, oh, we're just going to be drilling on some set of facts or something like that on a computer. It's sort of not. It's not what we're imagining, I think, when we're up here and when all of these people here are innovating on what the future would look like.
I want to quickly point out that the process Gunnar described is not teaching as we know it at all. It's a process of guiding, it's a process of helping, it's inspirational, but it's not teaching. You're not telling students what to do.
Great, thank you. We have about 10 minutes left. We'll take 2 more questions. There was one here. I see so many hands up. We want to leave you some time to mingle after this. We're just under some strict guidelines about closing up. So we'll take a question here and then one from this side, I guess over here.
So thank you very much for all
thanks.
the speakers. As a female, I'm happy to join you on stage anytime soon.
Awesome.
Would you be able to stand up? Thank you.
I thought that Gunnar's point about the role of universities as preventing false positives was a really interesting one, because I've seen many of my friends try to get jobs in Silicon Valley who have taken very interesting paths in their lives and find it very difficult to get past a recruiter's eye on their CSV. I was wondering, in terms of the others, how do you think about that? And if we have this great people that are doing content acquisition, they're learning, they're doing things online, they're managing their own, like they're creating their own experiences, how do they get into the more traditional systems, or do we change traditional systems, and how do you think about that?
Thank you for that. That's the number one question I get in response to my ideas in writing, is how does this apply, all this stuff dropping out, creating your own education, how does it apply then when you're sending in your resume to get a job? Really simple answer to that. First of all, it doesn't apply well to, the more structured and traditional a field is, it doesn't apply well. So if you're trying to be a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, it's really good to have the most credible credentials you possibly can. The more that the field you want to break into is unstructured, creative, entrepreneurial design, for example, programming, entrepreneurialism, sales, where there are these less traditional, less structured fields, the more room there is for hacking your credentials. And what I mean by that is that there's actually 2 job markets. The one that we hear about most is where you look on Craigslist or Monster or whatever it might be, you see job openings, you submit a resume, you submit 100 of them, you don't hear anything. That's what is called the formal job market. That's, by all estimates I've seen, about 20% of hiring happens that way, 20%. So what's the other 80%? It happens on what's called the informal job market, where if you've ever been an employer, you know how this works. You need a position filled, you ask your employees, your friends, your colleagues, who would be a good job. You get through the grapevine some ideas of candidates. In that informal market, which is 80% of hiring, your formal credentials don't matter as much as a lot of other things. They're still relevant, they're not irrelevant, but other things matter a lot more. Specifically, access to that, networking. So that's where learning how to become a great networker, building a network, is really important. Now with all the online tools to do that, it's networking and building networks has become democratized. Also, being a good persuader, being a good marketer of your own services, communicating well about how you can perform those services becomes much more relevant than just sending in a standardized resume that looks pretty much like everyone else's resume. So in these more entrepreneurial fields and in the informal job market, actually credentials can be self-created. And if you have motivation, you can self-create those credentials.
I have a slightly more traditional answer to that. There's a woman named Kim Scheinberg in New York who's an independently wealthy individual who now is an angel investor. She worked on Wall Street for many years. She has no college degree. Her way to hack the system was to lie on her resume, and as soon as she got into the interview, the first thing she would tell them was that I don't have a college degree. I only put that on there to get past the HR department. And she never got turned down. She got all the jobs.
Yeah, and short of lying on your resume. There's
not recommending that you do that. I'm just giving an example.
But the point is well taken, and it was a good one. But the other thing is do something really impressive, right? So a question that I've seen posed and had some really interesting stares come out of it is, who would you rather have? Someone with a college degree and you don't know where from, or somebody who got a 1600 on their SAT, right? That's all you know about the two people, right? One is a measure that you know you didn't get because it was really hard, or at least I didn't get because it was really hard. And the other is something that I know a lot of knuckleheads who got, right? And given the choice, what decision would you make? And the answer to the question, like, how do you break those doors down, is do something really impressive. And I think that what's happening in the market right now is that these companies are trying to set up ways that you can impress them, right? And that's interesting. And if you can make the platform something where companies can say, you know what, like EA is a great example, right? They can't find great game designers by trusting the heuristics of the college degree, right? So what are they trying to do? They're trying to find out, maybe we can design some games that if people play them well enough, we'll know they're going to be great in our system, right? That credential is going to end up being more powerful to them than Princeton, right? Interesting.
Yeah, and I'll give you kind of the institutional version of it. What can the institution do? And I think is what Gunnar, Gene, myself are all trying to do. Today, your college degree largely tells the employer what you did between the ages of 14 and 17. It's basically all it tells you, right? Because once you get in, no one has any incentive, not the student, not the professor, not the institution itself, to not let you out, right? That is a devil's bargain, and it clouds what happens in the industry, right? What we're all trying to do is create signals that are accurate in various means, right? And when you create accurate signals, all of a sudden the market gets a substantially more transparent view of who they're talking to. And I think that until that happens, there are all sorts of one-offs, cure cancer, lie on your resume, do all sorts of wonderful, amazing things, but for the majority of the population, the industry has to create a better signaling mechanism, in my opinion.
There are a lot of football coaches at colleges that would recommend not lying on your resume at this point. But
Thank you. So we're going to take the one last question up front here. Right over here, right at the front. And for those of you that had your hands, I do apologize, we're just running short of time, and there will be some time for you to be able to mingle socially and hopefully catch some of these guys as well. So, yeah.
Okay. So we discussed a lot how traditional college is not working for a lot of people, but what we didn't really talk about is the readiness gap of people entering college. And while it might be okay for some people to drop out of college, it sounded a lot like you had the support at home, you had the homeschooling, you had an excellent education up until college. So what should we be doing in the industry, in new business models, to address the fact that so many people who are reaching college are not ready to be there, and because of that, they are destined to fail?
I'll give a real quick thing just from what I've been hearing from folks. So when people take a look at the platform we're building, charter schools, all these folks, they're suddenly starting to want to apply it to non-military markets, right? I'm eventually sure maybe, but in the short term we're focused here explicitly, but as a result of me not being interested in going there yet, I get a lot of really interesting insights from these folks who are leading the schools that are sending the kids on to the colleges where they're not prepared and they're dropping out. And the charter school folks and the folks in some of the public schools are just dying, right? They're killing themselves to get these kids as ready as they can, and then they're sending them off to colleges where they're dropping out by droves, right? And the short answer is what these charter schools want to do is forwards integrate their support structures into the collegiate experience, right? So they basically want to create that familial community that they've created on their campus and find a digital way to forward integrate it into the campus. The other way that I think it's going to happen is instead of demand push, it'll be more pull, right? Which is people in the back end who drop the ladder back down and pull the students not through college, but to the right end state that they should be getting to. It's going to be really messy and it's going to be really crazy to watch, but there's going to be some really interesting business models that emerge in the next 5 years to address that exact thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thinking behind what we're doing is trying to let's remove all the friction from this. Let's get clear and let's disaggregate it, right? So one thing we're doing is we're making it affordable, right? Because the big reason why people drop out of college, money. Let's start with that. So let's actually make college something you can afford to pay for out of your pocket, today's pocket, not the pocket you may have in the future, right? The second thing is let's integrate support into the platforms we build. So what we've learned as when we launched this, we thought, hey, low-cost school model, competency-based, use the best technology. But then we figured out pretty quickly is we better take the support structures that work out in the real world and let people build them into the platform. And oh, by the way, that's a cheaper way to market. That's another reason to do it. But what we figured out is we can bring those support structures right into the classroom. So we're encouraging groups, churches, and folks to set up camp on our site and support your community getting to a degree. Not like a kind of credential, but like a degree that's accredited that you can then go get your law degree with if you want to be a recovering lawyer like me, right?
Recovering lawyers. A whole set of jokes around that. But so this is both a higher ed problem, it's an employer problem, it's a societal problem, and it's a K-12 problem, all wrapped up together, right? And so there's a design principle at work at what both Gene and Gunnar both said, which is whenever an adjacent stage, you're trying to do something and the adjacent stage is not good enough to support what you have to do, you've got to integrate backwards or forwards or into that adjacency to do it. And so really briefly, sorry for a little bit of theory, but when IBM got its start building mainframe computers, they didn't care about logic circuitry and core memory and all these things that they had to do, but they had to build those things too because there was no one else doing it. And then they had to add a sales force. It wasn't something that they cared about, but they had to do it if they wanted to go to market. And everyone said, gee, see, look at those guys, you ought to be vertically integrated. Then this thing called Dell came up in the 1980s and 90s, and they were not vertically integrated at all in that way. And everyone said, gee, you ought to be like that because they were wildly successful. But what had happened was all these adjacencies had gotten good enough that they didn't have to do these things. And right now we're in this phase in education where all these adjacencies are not good enough. And so the success of a KIP or a Harlem Children's Zone and so forth is that they're integrating into these other things that really matter and impact academics. And so that's critical, and I think you're going to see higher education, just as Gunnar alluded, start to pull back as well for the same reason. It's why the state universities today before they even put people into the first year, they're spending tons of money, tons of time on remedial courses right now for just that reason. And ultimately, I think the answer in the K-12 system is going to be to move to a competency-based learning system. I'm not convinced competency-based learning will be universal in higher education for a variety of reasons. But in K-12, we've got to get rid of the seat time system where literally we pay dollars for the amount of time you sit in your seats. We've been measuring the wrong end of the student for the last 100 years. Now, if you move to that system and actually advance people when they've actually progressed and mastered, you flip everything on its head, right? And you stop having that problem over time. But it's going to be messy as we go forward. But you got to be attacking both ends of it. And Gunnar's persuaded me on this. Higher education matters a lot for that, because at the end of the day, a good high school is defined as that getting its students into a good college. And if good colleges are shooting at the wrong things, as these guys have shown that they are, the whole system's messed up. So you got to start at the end state and work backwards.
I want to hone in on two things that you said in your question. One is that you use the word college and you use the word prepare. And I think asking the question, how do we get students ready for college, is completely the wrong question that all educational institutions are now asking. The question should be, how do we prepare students for life? But beyond that, and at a more meta level, the use of the word prepare assumes that there are certain things that students should learn. We make judgments based upon what we think people should know. And I don't necessarily think that that's a good thing. I think students should define for themselves what they should know. Now, I'm going to get a lot of pushback on that from many people in this room. I think most people will disagree with me on that. But it's something to consider when you're designing learning systems.
Offer 5 seconds of pushback while the microphone's moving to you, which is not to say that that's not always true, but we have to distinguish basic skills and building blocks from some of these pathways that you can have. And so reading and doing some basic math and things like that are going to be critical no matter what. And I think a lot of education people engaged sometimes overlook that and just assume it is implicit when you actually have people that are functionally illiterate in society. And we're not thinking about that problem.
I want to just sound the bell one more time for the distinction between learning in an academic context and learning in general. A lot of the young people that you're talking about are considered by their teachers, society, maybe themselves, as failures because they're not fitting into this model of learning academic subjects. I've spent 2 years interviewing people who were seen as failures in that model. Some of them grew up in fairly comfortable middle-class circumstances, but a good half of them grew up in very challenging circumstances. They were seen as failures, having low prospects, and what happened was that failure was actually created because they were put in a system that had one metric of success, which is academic success. Get them out of that, get them in front of a team, leading a team, trying to sell something, trying to create something, and all of a sudden they were geniuses. So a lot of this sense of whether someone's a failure or not is whether they're being pushed in a box that fits for them or not.
Raise your hand if you are still inspired. Good. So what we invite you to do is take that inspiration with you and continue to start and to build on the courageous conversations that you started here tonight as you go back and start to take action on this. And please will you join me in giving this great panel and this great evening a big round of applause.
Let's have a round of applause for Emily and our organizer.
And for our committee, which is mentioned up there, and all the amazing volunteers for the evening, a big round of applause, please. And for our AV and tech crew upstairs, woohoo! There is wine and beverages. Stick around if you'd like to mingle some more. Thanks so much.